for ABoVE. So with that, I will turn it over to those three folks to give today's talk.
Hi, everybody. I'll share my video for a little bit. I'm Scott Gatz, and I will kick off the presentations today. Nice to see some ABoVE PIs, co-Is join the call today. As if you hadn't heard enough about ABoVE, it's nice you want to get some more of an update. And nice to see Simon Stevenson on. Congratulations on your recent retirement. I saw a lot of the email exchange about that through IARPIC. So that's nice. Yeah, I think this is, let me share my screen. I think this will be my third update on ABoVE to IARPIC. And I wasn't 100% sure what all to include because I wasn't, of course, sure who would be on today and how much you already know about ABoVE. So I didn't assume too much in there, and I do have some background slides. And you can see my screen okay?
Yep, we can see it.
Okay, great. Yeah, so I think, well, there's some of you who maybe don't know, it sounded like about ABoVE. So just briefly, it's a large NASA activity focused on high latitude systems of boreal and Arctic North America. The leadership group is listed there. You'll hear from myself, Peter, and Chip today. And really the overarching science question is focused on the vulnerability and resiliency of ecosystems in this part of the Arctic and boreal domain to environmental change, and how that influences, ultimately how that influences people as well. Let's see, okay. All right, and as I know, all of you know, there's a lot of change already underway in Arctic and boreal systems. This is a graphic I like to show that we put together for the 5th assessment report of IPCC, just giving you some idea of that, the diversity of changes taking place and how they're interlinked in many ways. For example, permafrost, thaw associated, often, not always, with fire disturbance, changes, other changes induced by fire, including regrowth trajectories and what type of vegetation comes back depending on the severity of fire and the frequency of fire and timing as well. Things like Arctic shrub expansion and how that's influencing the feedbacks to climate through albedo and carbon sequestration and snow capture and myriad other ways. And also, even though ABoVE is focused on the terrestrial component of the domain, there's an element of the influence of changes in sea ice and how receding or less duration of sea ice cover actually has a warming effect on the domain that we're studying on the land. So that's a quick overview there. ABoVE is set up as many of these prior large coordinated NASA field campaigns to scale from the leaf level up to satellites and use those satellite-derived products to inform terrestrial biosphere models over large areas. So I'll talk a little bit about that, but yeah. And a key component of all this scaling activity, going from leaf to plot to towers to airborne, is this airborne component, which Chip will talk about a bit. It's a significant investment of resources and adds a great deal to this ability to scale across spatial scales. Just a quick overview. This gives you some idea of the spatial domain of ABoVE research. Again, it's northwestern North America. And again, Chip will talk about this, but quite an extensive acquisition of airborne data of various sorts, captured very briefly here. So I'll leave that for Chip. As noted, ABoVE is quite a large activity. Currently, there are 90 some NASA-funded projects, and they're augmented with another 25 affiliated projects, including Canadian funded activities, whether funded through academic efforts or government, including Polar Knowledge Canada. There are some 284 project leads and investigators, some 800 science team members, and then a good number of other people who follow ABoVE through our newsletters and email distributions. So that might include people like land managers or graduate students, anyone who really wants to keep track of what's happening as part of ABoVE science. I think by any measure, ABoVE has been quite successful. We are, yeah, this is my third update, I think, for IARPC, as I said, and those have been separated by about 2 years. So we are like in our 6th year of ABoVE, scoped for 10 years. Thus far, we've got over 300 refereed, peer-reviewed publications, and many more in the pipeline. And also importantly, a lot of data sets archived, 180 with another at least 120 more that are in the pipeline in some form, planned or in a preliminary stage before being archived longer term at the Oak Ridge DAC, Distributed Active Archive Center. So that's as of now, that's where we stand in terms of that. And the data set part of this is really important, as some of you on the call know in particular, because these are data sets that will be mined for years to come, even after ABoVE ends in 4 or 5 years or so. So much of the work of ABoVE is organized around thematic working groups or disciplinary working groups. This is a representation of those. It's not exactly accurate, but it's a graphic that was done maybe a couple of years ago now. But there are working groups like in hydrology and permafrost, carbon dynamics, wildlife, snowscapes, fire and insect disturbance, vegetation dynamics, and another working group on vegetation structure, and so on. There are other working groups as well. So this is where really a lot of the work gets done. So this goes beyond the project level activities to people working together in these thematic areas across projects. And then importantly, also there are cross working group activities, including a number of synthesis activities, which I'll touch on briefly. And what I wanted to try to convey a little bit today was some of the results that are coming out of ABoVE. It's obviously, I can't do that in a very short talk, but especially given how many publications there are out on ABoVE. But I'll give a couple examples here. This graphic is showing Tundra productivity changes through time over the Landsat Era. This is one of maybe the first study that's done a pan-Arctic Landsat assessment. Landsat is 30-meter resolution. So that's much finer than what we've been used to working with for doing these pan-Arctic assessments of Arctic greening and browning, so-called greening and browning productivity changes. And without going into much detail, what we're seeing is that greening is occurring across much of the Arctic, which supports previous work. Not everywhere. Much of the Arctic is not greening or browning. Much of it is over the Landsat area, at least not changing dramatically, but a good bit of it is. I think something on the order of 30% of the Arctic is increasing in productivity. And you can see that in these graphs, which show different time periods between 2000 and 2016 versus 1985 to 2016. And those greening trends are clearly associated with the summer warmth index. So there are these links between warming and productivity changes. This is work led by Logan Berner. And then I just have 3 of these slides, 3 or 4 maybe. And this is another nice piece of work that came out last year in Proceedings in National Academy of Sciences, looking at the changing Arctic CO2 amplitude, and importantly, being able to attribute like flask sample measurements that have been going on for quite a while, be able to attribute regionally over large spatial domains what the primary components of that Arctic CO2 amplitude are, where they're coming from. So you can see in the blue lines in the moving graph, that's associated with the high latitudes of North America. The red line is Northern Eurasia. Green line are temperate systems. And then the black line combines all of those. So you see this very strong seasonal signal in CO2 uptake during the growing season. But what's nice about this work is it's really advanced our ability to attribute on a regional basis the changes in the overall CO2 amplitude and ultimately the trends in that through time. Other work led by Sue Natali, published recently as part of ABoVE and the Permafrost Carbon Network, focused on winter CO2 respiration using sites distributed all across the Arctic, chambers and towers and so on, to really capture what's happening in the in the snow off season or the outside the growing season. And it's a significant component of the annual carbon budget. So this is important work in terms of getting a handle on that. And then they went ahead and projected using statistical approaches, what's likely to occur in the future under RCP scenarios. And this map is showing projections under RCP 8.5 out to 2100 and showing really quite substantial, if things continue on their current track, quite substantial increases in winter respiration with a cumulative increase of some 27 petagrams of carbon above the current climate. So that is extremely significant and something we very much want to avoid. And then finally, some work by Xanthe Walker, published in Nature, looking at how the increasing severity of the fire regime is tapping into mobilizing via combustion legacy carbon that has escaped previous burning for long periods of time. So this is a nice paper showing really that in many wet areas, you don't see a lot of, very rarely do you see legacy carbon combustion, even in very severe fires like what this paper is based on, Northwest Territories. You do see some sites where that occurs, but primarily this legacy carbon, burning of legacy carbon is occurring on drier sites and with more frequent fire intervals. So that's the brief version of that. Nice work. Encourage you to have a look at that if you haven't seen it. Okay, and then as I mentioned, there are quite a few synthesis activities going on as part of ABoVE, which I personally think is really quite important because we're going again beyond thematic or disciplinary working groups to cross working group activities. I won't go through these other than to point out that there are quite a number of those, and a number of those cut across working groups, as I mentioned. Here's another, the first few are from fire disturbance, vegetation dynamics, carbon dynamics, and then cutting across into biospheric modeling, hydrology and permafrost, and other cross-cutting activities. And I know some of you on the call were involved with these. Okay, and then finally, just to point out again that ABoVE is ultimately really about trying to capture these changes in the vulnerability and resiliency of the terrestrial component of the Arctic system, and not only in this part of the world where we have all the field activities focused, but really pan-Arctic, pan-boreal as much as possible by using terrestrial biosphere models. And then finally, I didn't really get into knowledge gaps. We have a paper coming out that will talk a lot more about that. And, but this is a paper that was published a few years ago now already, sort of in phase 1 of ABoVE, where modelers have identified across some 20 modeling groups what are the key variables that we still need to get a better handle on. So you can see, for example, soil carbon. This is for the Arctic Boreal domain. Soil carbon is a really critical component. Other things like plant biomass and net primary productivity and so on. So that's it for my part of this. Thank you very much. I don't know if you want to take questions now or we move into hearing from Chip.
Okay, thanks. It's great to be back talking to everyone again at Arabic. And Meredith, please let me know if there's any feedback or if my bandwidth is a little bit low with both video and sharing the screen on. For the ABoVE airborne campaigns, we've had flights 2017, 2018, and 2019. Unfortunately, due to the pandemic, we had to defer last year's campaign, but and I'll let Peter talk a little bit more about the thinking that we're having with respect to 2021. But the framework, the basic framework, was laid down with the L-band synthetic aperture radar lines. These are the framework against which we made all of the planning, and you can see that they cover a number of the so-called greening and browning areas. They also cover north-south transects. They cover east and west transects and numerous bioclimatic zones. And the reason that we use these as a framework is because to do repeat pass interferometric SAR, where the aircraft needs to fly the same path plus or minus a couple of meters, this is really something that we had to lay down and really not change going forward. So this is the basic structure that we're using. And then you can see that structure repeated here in the Avarice hyperspectral imaging acquisitions, although there are a number of places where we've added additional sampling outside of the main SAR. So for instance, here around Great Bear Lake, mapping of the Mackenzie Delta. We've got mapping going on of the Canadian High Arctic Research Station, CHARS. Also for Matt McCander, we've got some nice samples taken here in the Colville Delta, and we have a little bit more freedom actually to handle and address requests from individual investigators as we're doing the ABoVE Avarice planning. So here's a sample of we've got from 2017 to 2019 there. And then in 2019, we flew Elvis, which is a...
Chip, I'm gonna go ahead and suggest turning off the video. It's not too bad, but it's enough.
Okay, so sorry, I need to get out of that for just a moment. Shoot. Okay,
I think I can stop your video.
Could you do that, please? And then I'll just go back to sharing this. Thanks, Meredith. And then we were able to install a full waveform LiDAR, which is called Elvis in the airborne version on a Gulfstream 5 that is a new acquisition by NASA. And that gave us tremendous range and endurance. And so here you can see in green all of the high quality acquisitions that Elvis was able to make. So not only does it include lots of the radar lines that you can kind of see here highlighted in white, but there are a number of these very long transects that were acquired that are actually underflights of ICESat-2. And so we're using the combination of satellite airborne and multi-sensor airborne to understand characteristics of the boreal forest. Here's one that's really nice for Jan, which goes from the boreal forest into the tundra and covers the tundra taiga ecotone. And we're looking also at things like water surface elevation, et cetera. And Scott mentioned a number of the synergies that are ongoing, and we're beginning to exploit those with the airborne sensors and linking into what's going on there. I'd finally just like to mention that we have a lot of activity focused over here in the Seward Peninsula in coordination with the NG Arctic community, and we're getting tremendous amounts of technical and detailed on-the-ground information that we're able to then correlate with what we're acquiring from satellites and airborne data, and additionally using some of that on-the-ground information to calibrate and validate the airborne retrieval products. And Peter, if you'd like, I can just queue up and go on to the next slide unless you wanted to speak to some of these.
In fact, Chip, I think maybe you could just take it down, and we'll save that text for the record so that people can go back to it. But rather than my reading that out loud, I think you can just, in fact, maybe I'll turn on my video. Which I think is working. Okay, folks. As Chip mentioned, we have started considering what we will do for 2021. We did have to cancel the airborne campaign in 2020 due to the COVID situation. We continue to have the health of our team and everyone that we might interact with as a very high priority. This is particularly important in many of the remote areas of Alaska, Northwest Territories, and Yukon, where communities are small and the healthcare infrastructure doesn't have great capacity even in the best of times. So a team coming in to do field work, just having an ATV accident or something like that can stress the healthcare system, much less bringing in COVID or something like that. So we've been conferring with the teams that need the AVARIS and the SAR data since about the middle of January to explore what their constraints are, what they would need, what our field teams would need to have in place in order to do the field work, and which areas that we might fly with the priority. So last week we decided, as a result of those considerations, that we would postpone the AVARIS airborne campaign into 2022. So that would probably start a few weeks later than in previous years in order to coincide with some European flights that go under the acronym of COMET that will be taking place in late July through some part of mid-August next year. It seems that we will have a very high chance of the maximum science recovery if we fly AVARIS in 2022. And we're hoping that the situation regarding to COVID is much improved. There are many reasons to think that it will be, including we learned yesterday that 50% of the population of Canada's Northwest Territories has now received at least the first vaccination. They've been quite aggressive in getting that rolled out. Regarding the SAR flights, that remains uncertain. We're continuing to evaluate whether it's possible to get our field teams into some of the areas, the critical areas around Great Slave Lake in Northwest Territories, where much of that burn research that Scott was speaking about, for instance, has taken place. There are quite a number of ground observations that need to be made, including the ones you might expect regarding active layer depth and soil moisture, for instance, but also a lot of painstaking measurements of the extent of vegetation inundation, which is one of the things that we're hoping to pull out of the radar retrievals to differentiate between open water vegetation on land and this often rather extensive vegetation growing in water. And that work takes a lot of time, and those teams really need to be on the ground to make that science go forward. So we continue to adapt our plans following NASA's return to work guidelines. And of course, our funded investigators have to follow their own institutional guidelines, and we all have to respect the travel guidance that's in place for different parts of Alaska and Canada, which is in fact quite variable. For instance, it's relatively easy to do field work around Fairbanks right now. But if you go up onto the North Slope, quite a number of restrictions come in place, some imposed by NSF for access to Tulik, some imposed by local communities. So returning to field work, full activity remains a complex process. We're very aware of the impact that the pandemic has had on the projects of graduate students and postdocs and early career researchers. So we're working with the science team and with Mike Falkowski on this call and Hank Margolis to address some of the concerns that the early career folks have. So regarding the SAR flights in 2021, we're now thinking that we'll make that decision perhaps by the beginning of May. The aircraft operations teams are prepared to work with us, a little bit of a sliding decision point, and the folks that need to plan their field work also feel that they can wait a bit longer to see how things develop before we make that decision. We revisit this conversation with our team every other Wednesday at 5 p.m. Eastern. The next one of these is on the 31st of March. If you feel like you want to engage in that discussion or listen in or something like that, feel like it pertains to you, then and you're not already on the list, shoot me an email. And we're trying to continue this discussion with as much transparency as we can manage. So that's, I think, what I wanted to say, and I guess we can take questions for any or all of us.
Yeah, looks like we have plenty of time for questions, so feel free to pipe up. I'm doing the meeting through Google Chrome, so it's hard for me to see the chat and everything. So just feel free to chime up if you have a question.
Yeah, I've got the chat where I can see, not seeing anything yet. There's a question here from Xanthe about snow data sets and snow products generated as part of ABoVE. So the airborne activity primarily is, at this point, is snow off, right? So given that snow off information is good for snow data sets, we've got lots of that. We also have, Scott mentioned, the Snowscapes working group, which is working with data sets that have been generated through ground observations. A lot of that has been in the Wrangell St. Elias area. And I don't know if any of that has made it to DAC archives status off the top of my head. Liz might know that off the top of her head, but the Oak Ridge DAC would be a place to look for that. I know that their intention is to create, shared data sets. And Scott, do you want to add anything to that question?
Yeah, there are some other snow data sets beside field measurements that the Snowscape working group is putting together. I'm getting feedback. I don't know about any of you. You're muted, Peter. Yeah, so there's actually a meeting next Wednesday between the Snowscapes group and the modeling group, with the idea being of using something called the snow model to generate snow products across the entire domain, but to try to focus those on areas where they would be most useful for the modeling activities. So any of you are welcome to join that. If you follow the Snowscapes working group or the modeling working groups of ABoVE, if you're on that list, you can get on that list just by going to the ABoVE website and requesting it. So you could participate in that and hear some more details. And then we are also, part of my group is developing Landsat based snow extent for the domain. This is something we're doing just recently for other purposes, but that's something we, depending how good it is and how much of an improvement is over Modus products, I suspect it will be, we would archive that on the DAC as well. Hopefully that answers your.
Hey, this is Chip Miller. I'd just like to add that we've been in extensive conversations with the SnowX team about a cold season campaign. Terrestrial Hydrology is currently deciding about a set of proposals that were solicited last year for SnowX. And once those decisions are made, I think we'll revisit the planning for a notional January to May 2022 campaign for SnowX Alaska.
And this is Liz. I don't know if you can all hear me now. Maybe, yeah, okay. There are some snow products listed on at the Oak Ridge DAC, which is the archive site for the ABoVE data sets. And I've put the link in the chat to get you to the page where all of the ABoVE data sets are listed at the DAC. And then if you just search on snow on there, you'll see a number of them. They're mostly within the hydrology and permafrost group of data sets. And there's maybe 4 or 5 or so that are related to snow.
Well, thank you so much, Peter, Scott, and Liz, and Chip. Yeah, it's good to hear that you have the conversation with snow model developers and Glenn Liston. I think it's an amazing effort. And Liz, thanks for the link. I think I might have looked for there, and I saw the CREL sites around Fairbanks and yeah, some other sites. Great, thank you so much.
Great, thanks.
Peter, we have an additional question from Ali Reza about any possible P-band flights.
Yeah, either of us could address that. The short version is not currently any plans for more P-band flights, although there's continued interest from some members of the science team.
Particularly with respect to the fact that in 2017, we had intended to have joint, i.e. same day P-band and L-band acquisitions over the same lines. And because of technical issues with the aircraft and the sensors, that wasn't able to happen. So that is a gap that we recognize, and there's a possibility for potentially addressing that.
Chip, I wonder if you could say anything more, Peter, about the status of the P-band sensor instrument in terms of being facility, a NASA facility instrument, and what that means.
Yeah, so it's transitioning into facility status. I'm not sure that it's completely there yet. Facility means that NASA headquarters provides continuous funding to support kind of operational capabilities. The L-band SAR has been in that status for quite some time. And with additional infrastructure comes faster data processing, very well understood and reliable products, and some debugging. The P-band SAR has more recently transitioned into that status, and they're still working on updating the operationality. That's not quite a right word, but the operational capabilities of P-band, and you get the same basic groups of people, and it now will just be working on those data sets and bringing them to a greater level of maturity and faster latency.
And I guess that also translates into what it costs a program like ABoVE. Because before being facility instrument, I believe the costs are significantly more to
Yes, that's
ABoVE.
the case. The cost for the P-band flights to the investigator or to the ABoVE program is much higher than the cost of the L-band, and that is indeed one of the holdbacks.
More questions welcome.
Yeah, I don't see any questions in the chat.
Mike, you're at least at my end, you were pretty broken up, but I think you were just talking about there aren't any more questions in the chat. But
Can you hear me now?
that's much better.
That connection. Okay, yeah, I'm having spotty internet issues. I apologize. Yeah, can you hear me now? If I'll be able
Yes, we can
to,
hear you.
if you guys can hear me or not, but okay. So if there are no other questions, we can give it another couple of seconds, but if there are no other questions, we can transition into any member updates that we might have. I don't know how you want to do that, Meredith, if we just opened up the floor or if we want to turn it over, call out specific.
Yeah, I think we can start by opening it up. So this is just a chance to share with the community on the record, because this meeting is recorded. And also I'm taking notes. So if you have anything that you'd like to share with this group and the larger terrestrial ecosystems collaboration team about projects, conferences coming up, events, papers that were recently published, now's a good time to share, and we welcome those types of updates.
Hey, Meredith, this is Chip Miller. If no one else has anything, I'd like to give a quick update on the NASA ESA Arctic Methane and Permafrost Challenge. So we've had really good interactions with our ESA European colleagues and have continued to be thwarted in actually getting together physically, but we're looking for the first opportunity to do that. We have convened a number of times, both at conferences and just for working group meetings virtually. And there are a series of synthesis papers that are now being submitted to a number of high profile journals. I hope that we'll see those coming out in 3 or 6 months or so. One is part of a collection of related reviews on the Arctic. Another was solicited and is going to come out hopefully soon in Nature Geosciences. So I'll keep everybody updated on there, but they cover different aspects of permafrost thaw, particularly with respect to methane emissions. And if you're interested in joining or participating in that, please contact me. I'll post my email address in the chat.
Thank you. Very helpful.
I can also, this is Scott again, report that there are a couple papers coming out in pretty high profile journals as part of ABoVE. One is in Science, led by Michelle Mack, looking at vegetation regrowth trajectories and carbon implications across interior Alaska from sites that have been studied since 2004. So that's a long-term effort with a nice paper coming out. And another is a paper coming out in Nature on the so-called zombie fires in Alaska, the overwintering fires in the Northwest Territories and in Alaska, and I think the Yukon as well, and how those have been characterized through a combination of field measurements and remote sensing. So a couple of things to look for in the near future.
Thank you. And I see that Chip's put his email address in the chat if anyone's interested in the permafrost initiative. Any further updates?
I might mention that we're going to have a somewhat shortened ABoVE science team meeting in May. And of course, I don't have that right in front of me. It's going to be on a Tuesday and a Thursday in the afternoons on the 11th and the 13th of May. We're going to announce that broadly. So anybody's welcome to join in and listen in, participate during that.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, final.
Anybody
call.
else have anything they want to say, or?
Okay, sounds like we might be able to give people back 10 minutes of their day.
Great, thank you for having us.
Thanks.
Thanks everyone, great to virtually catch up again.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for the update, you guys.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.